The sacrifice begins. The night was cold. The kind of cold that seeps into the bones and makes silence feel heavier than sound. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his car outside Sandra Bullock's home. He had just finished a long day of work, his body aching from endless rehearsals and interviews. Yet he stayed there in the dark not because he had to, but because he felt he should. Earlier that day, he had received a message from Sandra. It was short, almost too short, but he could hear the sadness between the lines. She had written, "Today feels heavier than usual." Keanu knew her well enough to understand what those words meant. She was smiling for the cameras, laughing for the world, but behind closed doors, she was carrying loneliness. He could have gone home, wrapped himself in the warmth of his own quiet apartment, and ignored the heaviness in her words, but he didn't. He chose to drive across the city, his eyes heavy with fatigue, his heart heavy with concern. He thought to himself, sometimes the smallest presence can change everything. When Sandra opened the door, her surprise was clear. She hadn't expected him. Her eyes were red from hidden tears, though she quickly tried to cover them with a weak smile. "Keanu," she said softly, "you should be resting." He shook his head gently, a small smile crossing his tired face. "I couldn't rest knowing you were hurting." She stepped aside to let him in, the warmth of her home contrasting the chill of the night. He noticed the untouched dinner on the table, the silence of the rooms, the way loneliness clung to the air like an invisible shadow. Without asking, he moved to the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves. "What are you doing?" she asked, confusion breaking through her sadness. "Making something warm," he replied. "Sometimes food can hold more comfort than words." His hands moved slowly, carefully. He cut vegetables, stirred soup, and filled the room with the scent of ginger and garlic. Every motion was simple, yet filled with intention. Sandra leaned against the wall, watching him. Tears welled in her eyes again. Not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming tenderness of the moment. When he placed the steaming bowl in front of her, she hesitated before taking the first sip. As the warmth spread through her body, her shoulders loosened and a soft laugh escaped her lips. "You shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not after the day you had." Keanu sat across from her, his own bowl untouched. "I'd rather be tired than know you're alone with your sadness." Those words pierced through her defenses. She lowered her spoon, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Why do you always show up when I'm at my lowest?" He looked at her, his eyes steady but filled with quiet sorrow. "Because I know how it feels to be alone when you need someone most. And I promised myself I wouldn't let people I care about feel that way." The room fell into silence, but it was not the kind of silence that hurt. It was soft, safe, and full of meaning. For the first time that day, Sandra felt like she could breathe again. What she didn't know was that this night, this act of sacrifice, would be the beginning of a journey that tested not only their bond, but their ability to hold each other up through storms neither of them expected. The night outside remained cold, but inside her home, the warmth of his presence lit a fire that no silence could ever extinguish. The night that revealed the cracks, the next morning arrived quietly, but Sandra had barely slept. She lay in bed thinking about the night before, about Keanu showing up without being asked, about the way he moved around her kitchen as though his only purpose was to take her pain away. The memory made her heart ache, not from sadness but from a strange mix of gratitude and guilt. When she finally came downstairs, she found him sitting on the couch, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. He hadn't gone home. He had stayed, guarding her silence through the night. She whispered softly, "You didn't have to stay." He opened his eyes slowly, a faint smile touching his lips. "I know, but I wanted to make sure you woke up to someone here." Her chest tightened at his words. No one had ever sacrificed their comfort for her in such a quiet, unspoken way. She made coffee and they sat together, sipping in silence. It was not awkward, it was healing. Yet Sandra's mind raced with questions. Why did he care this much? And why did she feel afraid to accept it fully? Later that day, Sandra tried to go about her routine, but she could not shake the shadows inside her. She confessed to Keanu as they walked in the garden. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I should be happy. Everyone thinks I'm living a perfect life, but inside I feel broken. I feel like I'm smiling only because people expect me to." Keanu listened carefully, his hands resting in his pockets. He didn't interrupt. When she finally stopped, he looked at her and said quietly, "Perfection is a mask the world asks for, but real strength is admitting when you're tired of wearing it." She stopped walking, her eyes brimming with tears. But what if I'm too weak? What if people find out I'm not who they think I am? His voice softened, carrying both pain and honesty. Sandra, weakness is pretending you're fine when you're not. Strength is allowing yourself to be real. I've spent years learning that lesson, and I don't want you to carry the same silence I once carried. His words cut deep into her heart because she knew he was speaking from scars of his own. She realized then that his sacrifice was not only about her, it was also about the pain he had lived through, the loneliness he understood too well, the resilience he had built. That night, Sandra admitted something she had never said aloud. I feel like I've lost myself. I laugh on set. I smile for interviews, but when I come home, I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. Keanu reached across the table, his hand covering hers gently. Then let's find you again. Not the actress, not the star, but the woman who deserves to smile for herself. The silence that followed was filled with emotion. Sandra's tears fell freely, and for the first time she didn't try to hide them. Keanu didn't offer a quick fix. He didn't tell her it would be easy. He just stayed. But deep inside, he felt the weight of something else. He had sacrificed his rest, his comfort, and his time to stand with her. But he wondered how long he could keep carrying both her pain and his own. What he didn't know was that the days ahead would demand even greater sacrifices, ones that would test not only his resilience, but the very bond between them. The weight of his silence, the following days, felt different. Sandra started noticing how Keanu gave so much of himself, but asked for nothing in return. He was there when she needed to talk, when she needed to cry, and when she simply needed someone to sit quietly beside her. But behind his calm face, she began to sense something hidden, something he was not saying. One evening, as the two of them sat in her living room, the fire flickering softly, Sandra turned toward him. Her voice was gentle but firm. You've been giving me all your strength, Keanu. But what about you? What are you holding back? He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with shadows. Then he gave a small smile, the kind that hides more than it reveals. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. But she wasn't convinced. She reached across the space between them, her hand resting lightly on his arm. You're not fine. I can see it in your eyes. You're carrying something and you won't let me in. Keanu's chest tightened. He had spent years locking his pain away, never wanting to burden others with the grief and loneliness that followed him. He wanted to be her anchor, not another storm. But the weight of silence pressed harder with each day. Finally, in a voice low and unsteady, he whispered, I know what it's like to lose too much. I know what it's like to sit in the dark and wonder if the light will ever come back. And sometimes, I fear that if I let those feelings out, I won't be able to control them. Sandra's heart broke at his words. She saw in him not just the strong man who had sacrificed his comfort for her, but a soul who carried scars deeper than most could understand. She squeezed his arm, her eyes shining with tears. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. If you're willing to sit with my brokenness, then let me sit with yours. His eyes softened, and for a moment the mask fell. He let out a slow breath, one that seemed to release years of buried grief. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. But in that silence, he allowed her to see the cracks. Their bond grew stronger, but with it came new challenges. The press had begun to notice his late-night visits, her brighter smile when he was around, the way their names now appeared together in whispered rumors. Cameras followed her more closely, and headlines hinted at stories neither of them had confirmed. One afternoon, after leaving a meeting, Sandra received a call from her manager. The voice on the other end was sharp. The tabloids are talking. They're saying you're leaning on Keanu too much, that it's unprofessional. The studio was nervous. Her chest tightened, anger and fear mixing in her veins. She hung up and drove straight to her home where Keanu was waiting. When she walked in, she didn't hide her frustration. They think I'm weak because you're here, she said, her voice trembling. They don't understand what you've done for me. Keanu listened, his expression calm but his jaw tight. The world will always have opinions, he said softly. What matters is what you know to be true. But Sandra's fear grew. She looked at him, her eyes filled with conflict. What if my career suffers because of this? What if they force me to choose between the work I love and the person who's been keeping me alive through it all? The room fell silent. Keanu's heart ached, but he stayed steady. If it comes to that, Sandra, don't choose for me. Choose what your heart can't live without. Her tears spilled at his words. He was sacrificing again. Not only his comfort, not only his time, but now the certainty of their bond. He was willing to let her walk away if it meant protecting her dreams, And that sacrifice, quiet and selfless, shook her more than any words could. When the world pressed harder, the weeks that followed were restless. Sandra noticed how every step she took in public was now followed by whispers. The press captured every glance, every moment beside Keanu, twisting their quiet bond into loud headlines. She pretended not to care, but inside she was shaken. She feared that the world would turn something pure into something cheap. Her manager's warnings grew sharper. "The studio is watching," they said. "If you keep letting this story grow, it could cost you future projects. People don't want weakness, they want the star who always shines." The words haunted her, like chains wrapping around her spirit. When she came home that night, she found Keanu waiting with 2 mugs of tea. He smiled softly, but the moment he saw her face, his smile faded. "What happened?" he asked gently. Sandra sat down, her hands trembling. "They're saying I'll lose work if I keep leaning on you. They think I'm fragile, that I can't handle life alone." Keanu sat across from her, quiet for a long time. Then he leaned forward, his voice calm but strong. "Sandra, the world will always punish honesty and reward masks. But you don't have to live for them. You've already given them enough of yourself. When do you start giving yourself what you need?" Her tears broke free, falling fast. "What I need is you, but I'm afraid of what it will cost us." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Then let it cost me, not you. I can carry the weight if it means you keep smiling." Those words cut into her heart. He was offering himself again, sacrificing his peace so she could breathe. But the guilt inside her grew. She whispered, "Why do you always give everything and take nothing? Don't you ever get tired?" He looked at her with eyes full of quiet sorrow. "Of course I get tired, but seeing you smile gives me enough strength to keep going." That night, Sandra lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The fear of losing her career clashed with the deeper fear of losing him. She realized that the real battle was not against the world outside. It was against the doubt inside her. The next day, as if fate was testing her, she received another blow. A close friend in the industry called her, their voice cold. "You need to be careful, Sandra. People are saying Keanu is distracting you. Some believe you're not focused anymore. I don't want to see you ruin everything you've built." Her hands shook as she ended the call. The words echoed in her head like a cruel chant. "Ruin everything you've built." She found Keanu later that evening, sitting on her porch. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, yet his presence was steady. "I heard what they're saying," he admitted. "And if walking away will protect you, I will." Sandra froze, her breath caught in her chest. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't say that. Don't you dare say that." Keanu's eyes softened, filled with pain he tried to hide. "I just don't want to be the reason you lose the world you've worked for." Her tears flowed as she stepped closer, gripping his hands tightly. "Keanu, I don't care about the world if I lose the only person who makes me feel like myself. The world can wait, but I can't let you go." For the first time, the silence between them carried not only fear but also courage. She chose not to let the world dictate her heart. Yet deep inside, both of them knew the storm was not over. The outside pressure would keep pushing, harder and harder until something broke. The question was, would it break their bond or would it forge it into something unshakable? The breaking point. The pressure finally reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. The whispers had grown into headlines. The headlines into sharp questions shouted by reporters at every corner. Sandra could no longer step outside without cameras flashing and voices demanding answers. "Is Keanu ruining your career?" they asked. "Are you falling apart?" Each word felt like a blade. She tried to smile for the world, but the cracks were showing. Even in interviews, her laughter sounded forced. At night, when she closed her door, she let the weight crush her chest. Keanu was always there, steady, calm, sacrificing his own comfort to hold her together. But even his presence couldn't silence the noise outside. One evening, after a particularly brutal article was published about her dependence on Keanu, she broke down. She threw the magazine on the table, her hands shaking. "They're destroying me, Keanu," she cried. "They're saying I'm weak, that I can't stand on my own 2 feet. I don't know how much more I can take." Keanu picked up the magazine and looked at it for a moment, then set it aside with quiet disdain. "Sandra, they don't know you. They don't see the strength it takes to wake up every day and keep going. They only see what makes them money. But I see you. I see the woman who has carried more than most people ever could." His words comforted her, but fear still gnawed at her heart. She whispered, "But what if I lose everything I've built? What if all of this, the roles, the respect, the career, slips away because I let you in? Keanu's face softened, his voice calm but filled with quiet pain. If I'm the reason you lose everything, then I'll walk away. I'll disappear if it means you can breathe again. Her eyes widened in shock, her heart breaking. Don't say that, she whispered, tears spilling fast. You're the only thing keeping me from drowning. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that tests everything. Keanu looked down at his hands, weary, torn between wanting to fight for her and wanting to protect her from himself. Then, as if the world wanted to push them harder, Sandra received a call the next day from her studio. The voice on the other end was cold and direct. If you don't distance yourself from him, we will have to consider replacing you in the upcoming project. The image you're presenting is dangerous for the brand. Her body froze. Her throat went dry. When the call ended, she sat in her living room staring at the floor. Keanu came in, noticing the look on her face. What did they say? He asked quietly. Her lips trembled as she answered. They want me to choose, Keanu, between my career and you. The words pierced him deeper than any wound. He felt his chest tighten, but he forced himself to stay calm. He took a deep breath and said, Then choose your career. Don't let me be the reason you lose what you love. Sandra's tears spilled as she shook her head fiercely. No, don't you see? I can't choose between them. Because if I lose you, I'll lose myself too. Their eyes met, both filled with tears, both trembling with the weight of the impossible. It was the breaking point. The world had cornered them, and now they had to decide whether to bow to its demands or stand against it together. And in that fragile moment, Sandra realized something powerful. Keanu had already sacrificed so much for her smile. Now it was her turn to sacrifice something for him. The choice from the heart. The night after the studio's ultimatum was the longest night Sandra had lived in years. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind torn apart. On one side was her career, the life she had built through years of struggle, sacrifice, and endless hours of work. On the other side was Keanu, the man who had given up his comfort, his sleep, his peace, just to make her smile again. She thought of the first night he came with a bowl of warm food, of the nights he stayed awake while she cried, of the mornings he sat quietly so she wouldn't wake up alone. She thought of all the sacrifices he had made without ever asking for anything in return, and her heart whispered what her mind was too afraid to say. She could live without the approval of studios, but she could not live without the man who reminded her she was more than a mask for the world. The next morning, she found Keanu sitting on her porch, tired but calm. His eyes carried both love and fear. Before she could speak, he said softly, Sandra, I've been thinking. If letting me go is what you need, then I'll do it. I'll step away so you can have the life you've worked for. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She shook her head. You don't understand. You've given me more than any career ever has. You've given me myself back, and I'm not willing to lose that. Not for anyone, not for anything. He stared at her in silence, his chest rising with unsteady breaths. Are you sure? Because once you make this choice, there's no turning back. The world won't stop judging. She stepped closer, her hand resting gently against his face. Her voice trembled, but her words carried truth. Let them judge. Let them whisper. I don't care anymore. What matters is the life I live when the doors close and the cameras are gone. And in that life, I want you. For the first time in weeks, Keanu allowed himself to truly smile. Not the small, quiet smile he often wore, but one that carried relief and love. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he would never let go. Then we'll face it together, he whispered. Days later, the studio called again, pressing her for an answer. This time her voice was steady. I won't distance myself from him, she said firmly. If that costs me the role, then so be it. To her surprise, the silence on the other end lasted only a moment before the executive sighed. Very well. We will proceed, but you should be prepared for the fallout. When she ended the call, she turned to Keanu, her heart pounding. I didn't lose it, she whispered in disbelief. They're still keeping me. Keanu smiled softly, but he shook his head. You didn't win because they kept you, Sandra. You won because you stood for yourself. That's the victory that matters. In the months that followed, the noise did not disappear. Headlines still spun stories, cameras still flashed, and whispers still followed them. But none of it mattered anymore. Sandra walked into every set with her head high, not because she had something to prove, but because she finally knew who she was. Keanu stayed by her side, quiet, steady, The same man who had sacrificed his own comfort to make her smile. But now it was different. Now she carried him too, making sure his sacrifices were no longer his burden alone. Their story was not perfect, but it was real. And in the end, that was stronger than perfection. It was stronger than rumors, stronger than fear, stronger than the world that tried to break them. And so, what began with one man giving up his rest to bring a smile to a friend became something greater. A bond built on respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. A bond that showed the world that sometimes the greatest love stories are not written on movie screens, but in the quiet moments when one soul sacrifices for another.